Joe Biden is messing it up, big tech is covering it up, and our nation's founding is fixing it up. I'm Josiah Everton, and this is the Glorious Rescue.
Aren't you tired of feeling forced to choose between staying informed and being indoctrinated? Listen to the condensed news cycle without the lies, agendas, and confusion from the mainstream media, all while engaging in deeper discussions about the principles that have influenced our great nation. This is what rescuing America looks like. This is the Glorious Rescue.
Welcome back to yet another episode of the Glorious Rescue. I'm extremely excited to have you here with all of us today in another episode where we are going to uncover all that is the hysteria, the craziness, basically all what we're seeing today in our day-to-day. We're going to go through it. We're going to unravel it. We're going to talk a little bit about some deeper concepts throughout American history as well in our end of the show segment, as we always do. So lots to cover as always. Remember, we are now 4 days out from the election. So if you haven't turned in your ballot, make sure to do so and try to do so a little bit early because we are, like I said, 4 days out. And there's probably going to be some delay in the election. And don't let that delay be because of your ballot. Before I continue on in the election, because that's the first topic, we are going to continue to update you and all of myself included, all of us here on is the election. And we want to continue to update ourselves and educate ourselves about that as it approaches. And if you think about it, our very next episode will be on election day. So it will drop Tuesday morning, the same day as election day. So be prepared for the episode on the election. It won't necessarily cover the entirety of it being the election, but we will uncover lots of it and continue to discuss it as normal. But before I do, I want to give you a brief recommendation, and that is if you go back to previous episodes, I just recommend you look at the episode description. Whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, obviously YouTube only has the past couple, but on other platforms, we're available on 9 or 10 audio platforms, I believe it is. Basically, all popular podcast playing platforms we are available on. And so if you do so, check us out, look at previous episodes, and just read the episode description. And then when you do so, we'll have a little bit of a segment in it, a little bit of a sentence or clause describing what the end of show segment is about. And I encourage you to go back and listen to some of them, or really as many as interest you. We discuss a very wide-ranging area of topics. We discuss all things American principles, American founding, all the way even going back further into the vast past, as some of them are named. And we go through and just study key books, key speeches, key men or women, obviously key figures throughout human history, and how they've impacted our American systems, our American founding, our American principles that we hold so dear. So I encourage you to do so. You won't have to listen to the entirety of all the previous episodes, but just maybe the last 5-10 minutes. And you can go back and just read the quick show description if it's something that interests you. Just go ahead and check back and do that. I encourage you to do so. It will be beneficial for you, especially as we continue these end of show segments, continue to move forward. And I understand that you wouldn't necessarily want to go back to those to read about those current events at that time, because they might not necessarily apply. So I would recommend you go back and listen to those end of show segments. Now I want to move into what is the election. Some of what is, again, Joe Biden's fallout. What do I mean by this, and what are some more indications of this? I would say he's campaigning now in states that we thought were very blue states that Joe Biden was basically handed to, and we thought he was going to win no matter what. He is now campaigning in those states. Very interesting. Why is he trying to go through that? It looks like his campaign is working a little bit more on the feverish side, trying to recover lost ground. That's what it seems, even though the polls indicate that he's leading in even battleground states, even Trump states sometimes, red states. So I think that's a good indicator that he's starting to slip. Another indicator of that would be the polls. Again, we've talked about the polls and how I don't necessarily like to trust the polls, but his gain is slipping in the polls. Another indicator of that. I've been listening to a lot of political commentary. A lot of experts give their commentary on the data and the polling data, or also the campaign data from what they're seeing in this election. A few things here to make note of, first of all. First of all, early ballot reviewing and vote counting tallies indicate that they are favorable to Republicans. I don't want to say this on a large scale. This is showing that Republicans are going to win. I don't want to give my predictions or anything like that. I just simply want to discuss the data here. And that is, first of all, it seems that the early ballot totals are becoming more and more favorable for Republicans, specifically in battleground states like Florida. Secondly, Biden's campaign, I mentioned this, seems to be in a tailspin. They are now on the campaign trail in states that are very strong blue states normally, and his polling grip, his polling lead is slipping more and more, indicating that it is not what the polls normally indicate. Next is the third and final note that I just want to bring to you before Tuesday, our next episode, but also the election day. That is Pennsylvania. That is really the focus, I think, of this debate. I've been listening to a lot of people say that if Trump carries a lot of the states that he carried, or basically all the states that he carried that seem to go very red, and if he lost a few different states here and there that seem probable that he could lose, if he wins Pennsylvania, he will be on solid ground. If Biden wins Pennsylvania, it will be a good indicator that the other battleground states will follow as well. So watch for Pennsylvania. That's what I will say. Obviously, we'll continue to discuss this on Tuesday's episode, but that's really what I wanted to get into in regards to the election. Watch Pennsylvania. Be ready for the election. We won't necessarily have a special episode or a live watching of the election, but just be prepared, obviously, for Tuesday's episode and be prepared for the election. Be prepared for November 3rd, Tuesday, for the totals to be counted. Really, the totals might not even be counted. The winner might not even be announced. It is possible that we will come out Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning, and not know who the president is. Very possible. So I just want to throw that out there as well. Will be unfortunate. It would be unfortunate, but it is possible. The next story is big tech. We've talked about big tech a few times on the show. I'm just going to briefly give a summary, the issues with it, what is really the entire summary of the situation, and the application I want to make, the plea that I want to make to you before heading into our end of show segment. Going to try to keep it a little bit more concise of an episode, as I have gone a little bit longer in these past couple episodes, trying to get used to the video version and all of that. So, big tech. We talked about big tech stopping Joe Biden or covering up Joe Biden falling. What is the issue with big tech? First of all, I want to remember that the left wants government control of big tech as well. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, they wanted control of big tech too. Government control, government intervention and regulation of big tech. So why is it now that the left is wanting government to stay out of the way of big tech? Well, it's because that big tech is working in their favor at this time. Big tech normally does. So what does the left want? The left does want a government regulation of big tech. What does the right want? And then what do I say is what we should want? What's the difference here? The left, like I said, wants this government control of social media platforms because they want to censor that. They want to suppress the First Amendment. They do not want free speech as rampant. I shouldn't say rampant because it sounds negative, but they don't want it as free as what it should be. And so they want government to come in and hem in private companies, or I should say corporations, social media platforms, and violate free speech, really. That's what it is, violate the First Amendment. The right wants the government to come in order to show a lack of transparency from those companies. And that's why I tend to agree with the right more on this issue. Because again, I am not in favor of government intervention in private business. Never am, never will be. I think when the government sticks its hands in something, it always messes it up. 9 times out of 10. Probably 9.5 times out of 10 if it's possible, 11 times out of 10 if it's possible. The government does not do a good job, especially in the private sector. So why is this instance different? It's because the members of Congress who are Republicans, the Republican members of Congress, what they are seeking is simply more transparency from these companies because they believe that they have not showed transparency because they are breaching what it means to be a social media platform company. They are breaching even their contract with their users because the idea is that a social media platform markets themselves and enters contracts with its users on the basis that this is a social media platform, that you have the right to freely post whatever you want. And the only really regulations on that are like insights to violence, certain immoral content, things like that. They have very few restrictions, only on those fringe type of activities, fringe type of content, and not to filter content for the user. So when a social media platform starts filtering content, starts promoting content, starts demoting content, starts posting certain possibly false information, warnings on content, things like that, showing biases on political issues, it is now not a social media platform, but a publisher, just like all the mainstream media platforms. So it is a violation of its contract. That is what the discussion is about. Is it a violation of contract with the users? Is it a violation of their actual company policy, what they actually are by definition? That's what it is. And so the Republicans are seeking more transparency on behalf of their filtering and on behalf of their censoring content so that they can judge better, are you a platform or are you a publisher? and then whatever answer you choose to, you will now be forced to show transparency examples of your filtering content so that we can show and prove that you are what you say you are. That's a little bit different than a government coming in and enforcing certain regulations on companies just because we want more government control in business. Different scenario here. So I do want to make that clear. So that's what the left wants. That's what the right wants. That's what I would say I want too. But you see this in the questions that Congress members are asking. The left is saying, one of the Democrats had said something like, the problem is not that we are not filtering out too much content, but it's that we are not filtering out enough content. That free speech is a threat to our democracy. He basically said all of this content is a threat to our democracy. Free speech is. If you remember in our last episode, we talked about how free speech or freedoms on behalf of the American people are only a threat to tyrants. I just want you to remember that it is tyrants who fear freedom of speech. Now, moving on, it is the Republicans who are saying that they want more transparency to force a company, if it is going to file as a platform, to act as a platform and filter content appropriately, or vice versa as a publisher. I just want you to remember this. The Democrats were saying that this whole plot, because if you remember, it regards specifically to an article posted by the New York Post about Hunter Biden and his laptop, and it was basically banned on all social media platforms. So Democrats backlashed and said this is only, the Republicans are only uprising because they are bullying these companies to force their agenda upon the American people. Really, that's the story the Democrats want to go with. You as a Democrat want to go with that story. So let me ask you this, members of Congress who are Democrats saying this, who do you really think, which side do you really think are bullying corporations for their own agenda? Because if I remember back in 2016, it was the Democrats who were mad at social media platforms for allowing content about Hillary Clinton's emails. And it was the left that was coercing social media platforms to filter out and censor that content because it was hurtful to the Clinton campaign, if I remember that correctly. Maybe I just don't remember. When you, as these members of Democrats, I'm not necessarily pinpointing all Democrats, but you are saying that it is the Republicans bullying companies, corporations, social media platforms to force their agenda upon the American people. Of course, because that's really what you care about. You care about that. Do you care about that when you were the ones supporting opening up Trump's confidential financial information before it was shared, before it was released? Did you care about breaching certain contracts to force your own opinion on the American people? Did you really care about that? When you forced a baker to bake a cake for a gay marriage because he had religious obligations or religious conflicts with that, did you really care about not forcing businesses to do what they don't and really cared about people forcing companies to force their own agenda? Did you really care about that? Did you care about that when we continued this debate about the minimum wage? Because if I remember, you stand on the side that supports mandating employers to pay employees at a certain wage. Maybe I'm forgetting something. But certainly it has nothing to do with the whole reason these companies are suppressing this information. It has nothing to do with the fact that you as Democrats, Democrats in high profiles in our American government, it is the problem in the first place with the censoring of this content because you are the ones bullying these companies into hiding, censoring, and filtering this information in the first place. So obviously it is not what you care about. We know this. We know it. Now, for more on the First Amendment, because this is really a discussion of the First Amendment, I want you to head back over to episode 21 over on our audio platforms. Just listen to the last few minutes. You will see on episode 21 where we discuss the First Amendment and not just the actual application on top, how it applies today, but what was actually written, what it meant when it was written, and how it applies today. I think it's more important to understand the deeper discussion of it before applying it today, because if we don't understand what it meant when it was written, we can't understand how it should apply to us today. So head back over to episode 21 for that discussion if you would like to. I would also say again, as I encourage you to go back to those previous episodes and look at them, review them, and listen to them, maybe look back at episode 10 where we talk about John Locke. Maybe look back at episode 8 where we talked about the biblical origin of human rights. That is a little bit of a discussion I want to get into today. Not necessarily that exact same discussion, but a discussion about us, America, as a Christian nation. So welcome back to the vast past. Welcome back to another episode, another segment of the Vast Past. I want to thank you for being here. I also want to encourage you to continue to look at and look through these end of show segments in previous episodes. I know I've said that a few times, but for this end of show segment, I want to discuss about the biblical influence in the American founding, American principles, American documents, all of these issues, because it is a heated discussion, and I think a very applicable discussion, a very heated debate in American politics today. Really, we see that emanated in the choice between Trump and Biden. Biden falls more on the side of the left, where they call for the decrying and the deterioration of the American system. They want it removed. They believe that it is systemically racist, systemically wrong, and systemically evil, whereas Trump would categorize himself as wanting to defend that founding. Biden would say the same thing, but Harris, Ilhan Omar, AOC would not, and those are really the driving factors of the left party right now. So I want to start off this discussion briefly with a recent article I read entitled Our Godless Constitution. This was written many, many years ago. There was actually, I want to say, a booklet or a book or something like that read and written several years ago as well, and that one had no citations, no sources in it. So two professors, college professors, wrote this entire book and gave no sources in it. And I want to remind you, if you are a college professor, nay, dare I say a college student, you would know that if you wrote an entire research paper, an entire book with no sources, it would get a 0% because it is not academic, it is not scholarly, and it is not actually studying, and it has nothing to do with resource, just your own opinion. Nevertheless, this is an article entitled Our Godless Constitution, in which he said that our country was not founded upon biblical principles or on God, because our Constitution does not say the word God in it. That is the slow clap for you, brother. That is a very, very interesting statement to make, because our Constitution does not say God in it. Therefore, we are not a Christian nation. Well, that's unfortunately a problem. I would say because the Declaration of Independence says we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Creator, capital C, I think that would say and denote deity. So yeah, maybe not the Constitution, but the Declaration of Independence would. But this is actually indicative of a much larger problem, and that is the possibility of, after generation, many people, young people, maybe even young people today, would think that our nation was not a Christian nation at its founding. That is the takeaway. Just to give you a few items to remember. So first of all, I mentioned it is in the Declaration of Independence. I want to set that aside and come back to it before saying this line right here. And this is backed in the writings of the founders, and that is 98% of our founding fathers stated in their own writings about themselves, or their contemporaries said about them in their writings, you can read it, that they believed in an active and working God. That means all of our founders, 98% of them basically all of them, said in their own writings, or their contemporaries said about them in their writings, so it is in writing, that they believed in an active and working God. This entire misnomer that they all were either atheists or deists is not true. There were several who were deists. They still believed in God, and it wasn't really deist what we think of today, where God just doesn't work at all. How do I know this? Because many of them referenced praying to God. Or God, for instance, some people say Benjamin Franklin was a deist, and yet Benjamin Franklin said that we ought to pray to God because he's a God who views the sparrow and cares for the sparrow, and he will guide us as we rise this new nation up. So you can't really make that argument. 98% of the founders said in their writings, or their contemporaries said about them in their writings, that they believed in an active and working God. Next, the documents. The Declaration of Independence. Let's go back to the Magna Carta, a founding English document where it set the English king and the English crown under the rule of law. Because we are all men and we all have a sinful nature, we are therefore all under the law. That is a biblical principle. It is then influenced into and inculcated into the Mayflower Compact, which we spent a good amount of time discussing, a very wonderful end of show segment that I encourage you to go back and look at, where we talked about how it was an act of self-responsibility, self-government, principles of responsibility found in the Bible, where we acknowledged God as soon as we stepped foot on this continent and requested his aid as we showed self-responsibility in governing ourselves because we knew we had a sinful nature. Then that influenced the Declaration of Independence, where we talked about our rights given to us by God, and it is government's responsibility to protect those God-given rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And then the Constitution sets up the framework in how to protect those God-given rights. That is another example. Another one would be the influence that John Locke had on the founders. John Locke believed in God-given natural human rights expressed through nature, expressed through conscience, and even expressed through the Bible. What do I mean by that? But that through the Bible, you can find the origin of human rights. Through nature and conscience, and just basic human reason would dictate that we have human rights and that God created government to protect those rights. I also want to mention one more item, and that is in the National Archives, where the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence are held. This is written on the wall. A proposal for the recognition of the authority and law of Jesus Christ, Savior and ruler of nations. That is in the National Archives. Do not tell me that we are not a Christian nation when we know that our founders, our founding documents, our principles are all biblical and derived in Judeo-Christian values. Do not tell me that when the founders, the documents, the principles, and even statements found all throughout our memorials show a recognition of God, a thankfulness to God, and in some cases, like the National Archives, a recognition of the authority and law of Jesus Christ, who is the Savior and ruler of nations. You don't get much clearer than that. And with that, we are going to conclude this episode of The Glorious Rescue. Don't forget, on Tuesday, we have the election. We have the presidential election 2020. We obviously will have lots to get into about the outcome of the election as it progresses. What else is on Tuesday? Oh, that's right. Tuesday, every Tuesday and Friday, another episode of Glorious Rescue. So make sure to tune in to enjoy more of these deeper discussions, more of these applicable discussions about how our nation was founded and how our nation can be rescued. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Josiah Evertson, and this is The Glorious Rescue.